All right, what is up, guys? I'm Josh, and yeah, welcome again to my Christian Tea Room. Oh man, today we got a good one for you. We're going to be chatting about the 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel 9. Now, this one is a big one to discuss because it tells us when to start looking out for the end times, right? And yeah, that's a big deal because life on earth changes pretty significantly when the church age ends, and end times begin. And yeah, just a lot happens in a very short time in the end times. And yeah, we just need to be ready. So, why don't we start by reading the passage in Daniel 9? Now, I read the King James Version, and basically, I do that because of the way that the translators were instructed to translate the Bible from the original Hebrew in the Old Testament and the original Greek in the New Testament. Basically, they were told not to try to read between the lines ever. They were told just to um, translate it as close as they can, as literally as they can, and not try to assume anything. And some of those assumptions in other places seem to be detrimental and kind of changed. I mean, changed the meaning, right? I mean, one of the major ones that comes to mind is when when the Jesus, he was in the garden right before getting arrested, and the Pharisees went to go arrest him, and they took him to the high priest's house to question him, and then they took him to they sent him to Pontius Pilate. He was the Roman governor. Now he's a Gentile, right? He's not Jewish. So when they took him to Pontius Pilate, they expected him to um, they were going to deliver him to Pontius Pilate, but it said in the Bible that there was a high day the next day. And so they wanted to stay ritually clean according to the Torah. They wanted to stay ritually clean because the high day was tomorrow, right? Well, what is a high day? A high day is a Sabbath day, right? We have our weekly Sabbath days every Saturday, but there's also annual Sabbath days that the Torah talks about. And those annual Sabbath days are the holidays of the year, God's holidays. I prefer to call them holy days. Um, but Passover, that's an annual holy day. First fruits, i.e., Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, right? That is a holy day. Um, then you have Pentecost, that's a holy day, and then you have the Feast of Trumpets in the fall. That's a holy day. The Day of Atonement, that's a holy day. All of these are annual Sabbaths, they're high days. And then you have the last great day, right? And so you get all of these, you get all of your weekly Sabbaths every week to where you're instructed to rest on Saturday. But then you also get these annual Sabbaths, right? Well, you can call them high days or you can call them Sabbath. It means the same thing, right? But in the non-King James version, the translator saw that they said, okay, so he got arrested, and it said that they didn't want to go into Pontius Pilate's house because the next day was a holy day. The next day was a high day. And they assumed, it said the next day was a high day, a Sabbath day, and they assumed that to mean the next day was Saturday. So they said, oh, we're just going to write down in our translation that today is Friday. Well, no, they meant that the next day was Passover, and that's not necessarily on a Saturday. And in fact, if we do the math, Jesus told us that he was going to be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, right? And he rose on Sunday morning. So you got Saturday night, Saturday day, that's 1 day and 1 night. You got Friday night and Friday day, that's 2 days and 2 nights. You got Thursday night and Thursday day, that's 3 days and 3 nights. So Thursday was the high day that he got crucified on. So the day before that was Passover night, Nisan 14, which is when you actually celebrate the Last Supper, and then, you go into the garden to pray. Jesus went into the garden to pray. right? Um, so they mistranslated that, and they thought it meant that Jesus got arrested on Friday night because tomorrow was a Sabbath day. No, Jesus got arrested on a Wednesday night, and Thursday was a Sabbath day, but it was an annual Sabbath day, not a weekly Sabbath day. And so little translation errors like that can really add up, and they can really make things bad when you're trying to interpret prophecy, right? When you're trying to figure out what a prophecy is saying, and you don't even have the translation right, you can really stand to get off track really fast. So I've just found in my studies that using the King James version, because of the way they were instructed to perform the translation, just makes it a lot more. You just get a much better translation. But it is harder to read because they're using these and thous, and he spoke to her not instead of he didn't speak to her. Right now, it it's still English, but it's old English, so it can be very taxing on your brain after a while to read it. So it can make you want to read the Bible a lot less. So if you're trying to read the Bible just to know what's happening and you're not trying to figure out a prophecy, I recommend something maybe besides King James. And if there's any like small little wording issues that you're seeing where you're not quite sure what it means, then you would consult the King James to kind of help you with the meaning. But in the case of prophecy, you pretty much always want to use the King James version. But so that's why I'm using the King James version now, is because we're talking about Daniel's 70-week prophecy. So let's flip to that really quick here. Daniel. Sorry, I'm going to my Bible here. Okay, here we go. So Daniel 9, and we're going to start in verse 24. And it says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the Prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof. I think I skipped something. Let me try that again. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the Prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So a little bit grim there, but tells us a lot. So why don't we dive into it? So first of all, a week in Hebrew, right? What does it mean when it says 70 weeks? Well, there's not really a direct translation for the word. In Hebrew, the word is literally translated a 7, right? Well, we don't have the word a 7. There's not, a 7 is not a thing, right? But we do have a dozen, right? So a dozen is when you have a set of 12 of something, right? Well, a 7 is a set of 7 of something, right? And so if we just call it a 7, and we just know that it's a dozen, except it's 7 instead of 12, well, then we'll all know what we're talking about. Yeah, we made up a word in English that wasn't there before, but we all know what we're talking about, and it helps us follow the prophecy better, what it's saying. Cool. So there's a chunk of 7 sevens, which if you do the math, that's 49 units of time. And there's a chunk of 62 sevens, which is 434 units of time. And then there's one final 7, which is 7 units of time. Awesome. So, side note, when the Bible isn't clear about what unit of time those are, whether it's years, months, weeks, days, whatever, that usually means that they will all get fulfilled, right? So if it's not clear, in my experience, I've seen it to mean, if it's not clear between 2 things, it usually means both. If it's not clear between 3, it usually means all 3. In this case, what I can think of is years, months, weeks, and days. So there's 4 different options. And it just says 77s, right? It doesn't say 77s of years. So presumably, maybe the 77s of days already got fulfilled. But it wasn't the ultimate fulfillment, right? Because presumably the year is the longest unit of time, and so the year is going to be the one that gets fulfilled last. And in prophecy, when there's the dual fulfillment, there's the former fulfillment and the latter fulfillment. And the former fulfillment is usually the lesser fulfillment, right? The latter fulfillment is usually the greater fulfillment. But sometimes the former fulfillment will be figurative, sometimes it'll be literal, and then the other one will be the other. So if the former fulfillment was figurative, the latter fulfillment will be literal. Or vice versa. If the former fulfillment, wow, that's hard to say. If the former fulfillment was literal, then the latter will be figurative. But yeah, and so you might ask at that point, like, okay, why is there always a dual fulfillment? Why is it always a sometimes figurative and sometimes literal? Why is it dual? Why can't it just be one fulfillment? Well, when you make a prophecy, or when God makes a prophecy, you want 2 witnesses to the fulfillment, right? That's what you have, is 2 witnesses. By the mouth of 2 witnesses, a matter is confirmed, right? That's what the Bible says. So if you have 1 fulfillment, that's only 1 witness to the prophecy being right. So you got to have your 2 fulfillments. Well, what if you have 2 figurative fulfillments? Well, that sounds to me like 1 witness witnessing twice. Same thing if you have 2 literal fulfillments, right? So if you want 2 different witnesses confirming the matter and confirming that the prophecy was fulfilled and is true, well, then you're going to want a figurative fulfillment and you're going to want a literal fulfillment. You're going to want one of each. And when I say figurative, some people can get, there's a little bit of confusion by what is meant by that. Figurative and spiritual fulfillments are the same thing. Literal and physical fulfillments are the same thing, just so everyone's on the same page. But yeah, so after 62 sevens, 434 years, I believe it's 434. Yeah, 434 chunks of time, the Messiah will get cut off. And so as Christians, we can conclude that the 62 sevens led up to Jesus' first coming, and what's left is the 7 sevens and then the final 7. Now, we know that the final 7 is the tribulation, so presumably the 7 sevens leads up to end time Elijah's coming, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But the 7 sevens would lead up to end time Elijah's coming, and then end time Elijah would come, restore all things, and then the final 7 of the tribulation would come, and then Jesus would come immediately after the final 7 of the tribulation. But yeah, so this passage says that from the decree until, and it says Messiah the Prince, literally, right? That's what it says, that, I'm quoting there. It says, quote, Messiah the Prince. But this translation is a little misleading, which actually disappoints me a little bit, because usually, like I said, the King James is pretty good. But what the Hebrew says is, Mashiach Negid. Now, if you use Bible Hub, which is an awesome resource, just Google Bible Hub, they have a lot of really cool tools that can help you search the Bible and find different translations simultaneously of the Bible at once. Um, but yeah, if you go to Bible Hub and you look at where Mashiach Nagid gets translated in the Bible, it shows you all the spots where Mashiach Nagid appears in the Bible, that phrase, or Mashiach, and then you can search for Nagid separately. But anyway, every other spot besides this spot, it gets translated as anointed ruler, right? But here, for some reason, they translated it as Messiah the Prince. And yeah, like I said, I think I'm a little bit disappointed in the King James Version because usually they're pretty good about not doing that. But I don't know, maybe they missed the boat here for one reason or another. Not quite sure why. But yeah, so Mashiach is a word meaning anointed, right? Nagid is a leader. So a Mashiach Nagid is an anointed leader. Well, what's an anointed leader? An anointed leader is one that's chosen by God, right? Like approved by God. Like God will set up rulers that are evil, that are, significant sinners. But they're not Mashiach. They're not anointed rulers. They're just regular rulers. They're just Nagids, right? But a Mashiach Nagid is one that is approved by God because they are, upright in the sense of they're righteous. They're righteous people, right? And so you don't have to be the Messiah to be a Mashiach Nagid. A Mashiach Nagid, King Cyrus was a Mashiach Nagid. King Darius was a Mashiach Nagid. Those are both two of the kings of the Medo-Persian Empire, right? They were the ones that allowed allowed the Jews to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple that Babylon had destroyed, right? So they were Mashiach Nagid. They were anointed rulers that were approved by God. King David, he was also a Mashiach Nagid. So you can be a sinner and still be a Mashiach Nagid. It just emphasizes that you're God approved, even though you're a sinner and you're a leader, instead of just a regular leader. And then, of course, you have Mashiach, the anointed one. And that's, of course, referring to the Messiah, which Mashiach is Messiah. So Messiah means the anointed one. But yeah, so the Jews don't think that Jesus is their Messiah, but for us Christians, we know that the Mashiach is Jesus, Messiah. So, okay. So this passage is talking about an anointed ruler, but not necessarily Jesus, that comes after the 7 and the 62 sevens. Now, from other passages, we can reasonably conclude that this means the Elijah forerunner, and we can get into that in a little bit more in a little later. But from other passages in the Bible, we can reasonably conclude that this means the Elijah forerunner is the anointed ruler that we're referring to, and not Jesus is coming, but the Elijah forerunner is coming, who is to come immediately before Jesus, right? So in the first coming, we have a decree from King Cyrus, because Isaiah 44:28 talks about, it says that King Cyrus will save Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, right? And then 62 sevens, or 434 years later, we see John the Baptist and Jesus come, right? So John the Baptist is New Testament Elijah, and then Jesus comes right after that. And we see Jesus get cut off just like we were expecting, right? So he got crucified for our sins and for our sake. He laid down his life for us sheep. So yeah. So at that point, 62 of the 77s were complete, around 30 AD or so. And in recent times, we saw a decree from the Knesset, and the Knesset is the basically Israel's Congress, right? So the Knesset gave a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, and we saw this decree in the summer of 1969, which is wild because that's like the song, right? Got my first real 6 string. Down at the five and dime. Yeah. So it's like the song, very prophetic. The summer of 69. Wow, so wild. But yeah, so in Jesus' second coming, the Jewish people will be called to come to Jesus eventually. But they don't accept yet that the 62 sevens have already happened. So how do you reconcile this? If the Jews don't think that the 62 sevens have happened and the Christians do think it's happened, and nobody can convince anybody otherwise, no matter how much Bible they quote one way or the other, right? But you know what? That's okay, because God had a genius plan for reconciling this and making it all work out, right? Because 434 years later, that's 434 years before, that's 62 sevens before 1969, in 1535 AD, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire, he went and he issued a decree. He issued a decree to restore Jerusalem's walls. So, you got a decree in 1535 to restore Jerusalem, right? Then you got 62 sevens later, 62 sevens of years later, 434 years later. Then to the year, you have a second decree in 1969, right? So 1535 decree, 62 sevens later, 434 years later, you got your second decree, and that's in 1969. And so we can assume then, since we know from other passages that the final seven is the tribulation, we know that the 7 sevens started in 1969, right? According to the prophecy. Right? So 7 sevens after 1969, we should see our Mashiach Nagid, right? Presumably our Elijah forerunner, right? So if we count 49 years from summer of 1969, let's do the math. All right, summer of 1969, that's the start of the first year. Summer of 70, that's the start of the second year. We keep going. So if we take our year and we minus and we subtract 1968, we get the year number of our count, right? So 69 minus 68 gives us 1, which is the start of the first year. So if we use that math, 1968 plus 49 gives us 2017. So the 49th year started in 2017, the summer of 2017, and ends in the summer of 2018. Well, nothing special really happened in the summer of between the summer of 2017 and the summer of 2018. So that doesn't really make sense. But that's if you're counting at first glance, right? And the Bible tells us how to count 7 sevens. In fact, we count 7 sevens every year when we're counting from first fruits, which is Easter, when we're counting from Easter Sunday to Pentecost, right? Every single year we count it that way. And the Bible teaches us how to do that. And it's not how you would do it in first glance. So yeah, when you're counting up to Pentecost every year, it shows us how. So we can glean information from that on how to count these 7 sevens. But before we do that, before we count 7 sevens Pentecost style, let's talk a little bit about something Jesus said. So hold on one second. Okay. So in Matthew 17:12, Jesus said that New Testament Elijah, which is John the Baptist, he would suffer at the hands of presumably the Pharisees, right? And likewise, Jesus would suffer at their hands as well. So in Jesus' first coming, he and his Elijah forerunner were both suffering servants. So the Elijah forerunner came first, and then Jesus came after, but the Elijah forerunner's life mimicked the Messiah's life to come, right? Both of them were suffering servants in the first coming. And so likewise, we can reasonably expect that end time Elijah's life will mimic the Messiah's second coming, right? I mean, yeah, and we can reasonably expect that we're going to see end time Elijah again because, well, we'll get into that right now. So in Matthew 17:11, Jesus says that Elijah shall come first, right? And this is presumably after John the Baptist got killed in Matthew 14, because Jesus said that Elijah shall come in Matthew 17, 3 chapters later, right? So presumably we can assume Jesus was talking about end time Elijah when he said that he shall, i.e., will come first before Jesus' second coming and restore all things. And so we see this in Malachi 4 as well. So why don't we take a quick look at Malachi 4? Got it right here for us. We can check it out. So Malachi 4 verses 5 and 6 says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse." So Malachi says that end time Elijah is going to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to the fathers, right? Well, John the Baptist in Luke 1:17, it says he was going to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, right? But it didn't say anything about him turning the hearts of the children to the fathers. So that's presumably end time Elijah's job, right? And the great and terrible day of the Lord is said to be the tribulation, right? Or the last year of the tribulation, when immediately before Jesus is coming. So we can expect end time Elijah to arrive and restore all things before that. That's kind of seems to be the timeline there from other scriptures. And if you guys put something in the comments about wanting to know more about that, I might do a video on that. But so Jesus' second coming will be as priest and king, though, this time around. He's coming in full glory this time. It was all well and good when he had his humble arrival on a donkey first time around. But he's going to be another level this time. Full glory, full angels. He's coming to take charge, and that's going to be glorious, right? But yeah, so Jesus' second coming, his second coming will be as priest and king with a tribulation to herald that coming. And since end time Elijah's life should mimic that, we can reasonably expect that end time Elijah will also come as priest and king, and will have a mini tribulation to herald his coming as well. So that being said, let's get back into our Pentecost here, our Pentecost count here. So when we're counting to Pentecost, there's first an event that starts the clock, right? You got your event, bam, starts the clock. And when you're counting when you're counting years until the end times, the clock starting event was the decree, right? From the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So that is the event that we're looking for when we're counting years to our Pentecostal year. But when we're counting days to Pentecost every year, the event that starts the clock is the Sabbath after Passover, the Saturday after Passover, right? So the Saturday before Easter Sunday. Side note, it's really called First Fruits Sunday because that's what the Bible calls it, and that's how the Bible celebrates it, but it's Resurrection Sunday, right? Easter or First Fruits Sunday. But yeah, so when we're counting to Pentecost, the event is that Saturday, that Saturday Sabbath after Passover, the day before Resurrection Sunday, Easter Sunday, First Fruits Sunday, right? So this year, Saturday after Passover is April 8th, 2023. And what's wild is when I was writing this script to go off of, writing my notes for this video, I was literally writing it on April 8th, 2023, which is wild. But yeah, so anyway, when you're counting to Pentecost, the day after the event is day one, right? Not the event itself. So Saturday, the event is the start of day 0, and day 1 is Easter Sunday, right? So if we apply that same way to count, summer of 69, when the decree was issued, is year 0, not year 1. The start of the 0th year, not the start of the first year, right? So that means the summer of 1970 is the start of the first year, not the start of the second. So whatever year we were at before, we got to count one more year. So that pushes our 49th year to the summer of 2018 instead of the summer of 2017. So, okay, the 49th year started in the summer of 2018 and ended in the summer of 2019. Nothing really special happened then, so that didn't really help us much, or didn't seem to. But the final thing when you're counting to Pentecost is the awaited day is the 50th day, not the 49th, right? Pentecost is the 50th day after Resurrection Sunday, after Easter Sunday, right? Not the 49th. So you're counting 7 sevens, but the day that you care about, the day, the special day that happens is the 50th day, right? And so our 50th year, so our 49th year started in the summer of 2018. Our 50th year starts in the summer of 2019. So starts in summer of 2019, ends in the summer of 2020. Now keep in mind, we're reasonably expecting to see a mini tribulation herald end time Elijah's coming, right? So can you think of any, tribulation-like events that may have started between the summer of 2019 and the summer of 2020? Like COVID, perhaps? Now, that blows my mind when I kind of put those pieces together and it finally made sense to be pointing to something relevant, and this wasn't like a little thing it was pointing at, right? This decree that got issued, like, all of Christianity's ears perked up when they heard this decree get issued in 1969. Like, all of Judaism, same thing, right? They see a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. They know that that's a big deal, right? So yeah, so it's wild to count in the instructed way and to see something worldwide, like something as big of a deal as COVID, like, be something that happens in that window of time. So wild. But all right, so let's take this another step even. So Old Testament Elijah was followed by Elisha, right? New Testament Elijah was followed by Jesus, and end time Elijah seems to be followed by Jesus as well, right? So obviously some parallels can be drawn between Old Testament Elijah and New Testament Elijah. John the Baptist, right? New Testament Elijah was John the Baptist. John the Baptist, Jesus even called him Elijah, right? Or at least the disciples knew that Jesus was talking about John the Baptist, to where they explicitly said so when Jesus was talking about Elijah. So, all right, come to find out, though, there's also some serious parallels that can be drawn between Elisha and Jesus, right? So in the Old Testament, whenever Elijah was performing miracles or doing anything, prophesying, anything like that, he always acted according to the word of the Lord, right? It was always according to the word of the Lord that Elijah spoke, right? He spoke the word of the Lord. But whenever Elisha did something, whenever he acted, he was acting according to the word of Elisha. Wait a minute. Why is he acting according to the word of Elisha rather than the word of the Lord? Like, it's almost as if he's like figuratively Lord or something. And that's very eye-opening and just very, very wild. But yeah, another thing, most prophets were not able to heal people, right? That was kind of another, you kind of had to be an extra special prophet to be able to heal people. If you were, if you, like Jeremiah, for example, he was a wonderful prophet, a major prophet in the Bible, but he prophesied, which is awesome. But yeah, he wasn't healing people. I mean, when you talk about Elijah, Elijah was raising people from the dead. He was bringing down fire on people that were trying to harm him. He was doing all kinds of stuff, um, you know, working miracles according to according to God's will, and yeah, um, and yeah. So if he's raising the dead, that's basically healing people, right? Um, but one thing, uh, Elisha and Jesus were the only ones that ever cured leprosy, right? So most prophets could just prophesy, they weren't healing people, but Elijah, Elisha, Jesus, and the apostles were some of the few that could. But then yeah, Elijah and Jesus were the only ones that ever actually cured leprosy, right? And both of them did. And what's wild about that is curing leprosy is like figuratively forgiving sin, right? Um, or you could say that forgiving sin is like figuratively curing leprosy, right? And you might ask, like, where did you pull that from, Josh? And so in I believe it's Leviticus, but in the Torah it talks about all the rules for maintaining like being ritually clean, right? To stay ritually clean, you got to do this, this, and this. You become unclean if you do this, this, or this, and this is how you become clean again if you became unclean, right? And so to go into the temple, you had to be clean. To participate in Passover, you had to be clean. So you had to make sure that you were, that you were following these rules so that you could participate in these holy activities. And one of the things, if you have a spot of leprosy on your arm, for example, right? If you have a spot, you're immediately unclean and you got to go through all kinds of stuff. You have to have the priest examine you. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. You have to have the priest examine you um, and make sure that all of your leprosy is gone before you're able to be declared clean again, right? So you're unclean while you have that spot. But the one kind of interesting thing about it is you become unclean and you become excommunicated if you have your one spot. But if your whole body is covered in leprosy, you're clean again. And I mean, isn't that how sin works, right? If you look at yourself, if you look at your spiritual self, you know, and you see a little spot, you see a little sin, right? But everywhere else you think is fine. Well, you're not fine. You're not right with God. But if you admit that your whole body is covered in leprosy, if your whole body is just so sinful that you're not even worthy of being in God's presence or asking for, his forgiveness or anything like that, that's when God loves you the most and God forgives your sins the most. If you say like, "Oh, I'm glad that I only have this one little spot of leprosy and I'm not like that complete leper over there." No, that's what the Pharisees did, right? And that's why Jesus said, no, the person who's beating their chest saying, "I'm not even worthy to be, praying to you, God," those are the people that know that they're covered in leprosy, and those are the people that are clean. And so sin sin is spiritual leprosy, and curing leprosy is for, curing leprosy. I mean, how do I say this? Forgiving sin is spiritually curing leprosy. And obviously, curing leprosy is literally and physically curing leprosy. So, yeah, curing leprosy is like forgiving sin, which is just wild. But yeah, so the bottom line is Old Testament, New Testament, and end time Elijah, they're all very similar to each other and all came immediately before somebody, right? In Old Testament Elijah's case, he came immediately before Elisha, right? In New Testament Elijah's case, John the Baptist, he came immediately before Jesus. In end time Elijah's case, presumably he comes before Jesus as well. And so Elisha in the Old Testament, it says he had a double blessing of Old Testament Elijah's spirit, right? So maybe Jesus has a double blessing of New Testament Elijah's and end time Elijah's spirit, right? Maybe Jesus has a double blessing of the Elijah forerunner's spirit. And so Jesus's tribulation is 7 years long, right? That's what it says, that one final 7. There's going to be, there's many scriptures that refer to the tribulation as being that 7-year period. So maybe end time Elijah's mini tribulation would be half of that, right? Since Jesus's blessing is double, right? 3.5 doubled gives you 7. So maybe end time Elijah's mini tribulation would be that 3.5-year period. And what's wild is we know that 3.5 is already frequently associated with Elijah, right? It stopped raining for 3.5 years after Old Testament Elijah prayed that it wouldn't rain. Elijah is often said to be one of the 2 witnesses, and they prophesy in sackcloth for 3.5 years, right? 42 months. And you can see that in Revelation 11. So presumably the COVID mini tribulation could go for 3.5 years before we see end time Elijah take the world stage as priest and king and prepare the world for Jesus's coming. But yeah, the other Bible prophecies, they point to end time Elijah's kingdom first starting in Israel and then soon spreading to the rest of the world after. So I believe we'll see end time Elijah get crowned king of Israel shortly after he takes the world stage. And, the Jewish people, they also crown kings on the Feast of Trumpets. That was their official day to crown kings. The Feast of Trumpets, you're announcing, you're blowing the ram's horn or whatever it is, the trumpet, right? You're blowing the trumpet to let the people know whatever that newsworthy thing to know was, right? You're letting the people know. But yeah, you got that's your New Year's Day as well, Rosh Hashanah, right? It's the Feast of Trumpets. It's the first day of the new year. It's the 7th month, which is kind of interesting that the year increments during the 7th month rather than during the 1st month. But I guess that's one of the kind of cool nuances about God's calendar versus the Gregorian calendar, which I might argue in another video is the Antichrist calendar, but we'll get into that in another video. But yeah, so the Jewish people, they crown their kings on the Feast of Trumpets, and that was their official day to do so. New year, new king. Let's out with the old, in with the new, right? And so this year's Feast of Trumpets is September 16th of 2023, which is so wild because it's 3.5 years to the month after the global COVID shutdowns started happening in March of 2020, right? 3.5 years to the month after March of 2020 when all those shutdowns. And so, yeah, that's why I believe we'll see end time Elijah get crowned king of Israel on the Feast of Trumpets this year. And I could be wrong about that. There was a lot of, I don't want to say speculation, but there was just there were a lot of jumps that had to be made. I don't think any of them were too far of a jump, but I don't claim to know. I just claim to, have observed these things from the scriptures that I see, and they seem to fit. And I'm not trying to set any dates or anything. I know that doesn't usually end well, but yeah, I think that's a definite possibility to see Elijah come that 3.5 years after COVID started, especially since COVID was the mini tribulation heralding end time Elijah's coming that happened on the Pentecostal year, right? It happened between the summer of 2019 and the summer of 2020, which is the window that God told us that that would happen in. And yeah, 3.5 is associated with Elijah all the time. And so it all seems to add up. I always, God says that a fool thinks his own way is right. He says that through King Solomon in Proverbs. A fool thinks their own way is right. A fool thinks his own way is right. The wise listen to advice. And so, yeah, so I'm not thinking my own way is right, but I'm thinking that it might be, and it's worth keeping our eyes open for and just watching and seeing. And that's really all we can do is just kind of watch and see. And so, yeah, so let me know in the comments what you guys think of all this. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. What's your take on end time Elijah arriving? What's your take on the decree pointing to COVID? Yeah, just let me know. I'm curious. So, if we can pray really quick, that'd be great. Dear God, thank you so much for this wonderful revelation that we have in front of us. I mean, if we could have that be true and we could have the end times be knocking on our door and we could be that much closer to you and to your precious son Jesus, dwelling with us, and just us being able to cling to you, that would be awesome. Even though the tribulation is a horrific period that that you say in the Bible, nothing is as bad as it. There was nothing like it before, and there will be nothing like it again because it was so bad. But you know what? If it brings us closer to you, God, that we love you more and are more devoted to you, like, God, that would be awesome. It just sucks that it would have to come through tribulation like that, and it can't come in seemingly any other way. So just please be with us as we go into these end times, if that's what's really happening, and just please watch over us, God. We're going to need all the help we can get, and we just want to love you, and we just want to get close to you, and we just want to be home in our permanent dwelling, because we know that the earth is just a tent that we live in. It's not our full mansion that Jesus prepares for his disciples and hopefully for us too. And so just guide us through this time, God, and I know you're always with us, but just stay with us, God. I love you so much, and I pray in Jesus' precious name. Amen. All right, guys, that being said, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, take care, you guys.